Hey everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Wayne. I'm the founder and CEO of Huts. And today we're going to be talking about our role in developing the starter home. And if you've been following along to some of our content and some of my writing over the past year, we've been exploring quite a bit this idea of where are all of the starter homes, the traditionally kind of the first step in the home acquisition process that has been sort of like the bedrock and foundation of American home ownership for almost 80 years now. And the truth is that these sorts of homes, that the smaller Cape style home or starter home, is just simply not being built anymore. And so we've kind of taken upon ourselves to take all of the lessons that we've learned from Huts, which include not only appropriately scaled homes, appropriately priced homes, but also democratizing the process of getting a home that rather than waiting on a developer to make a house wherever they choose is the highest and best use, instead putting the power back in the hands of the homeowner to be able to say, here's where I want to build the house. I'm going to take on that process of designing and developing it myself, utilizing Huts's very regimented conveyor belt type process to go from raw land through to construction. So how do we take that same idea that we've largely been applying on for Huts on both ADUs and small compounds and live workspaces and kind of rural homes of all types, and kind of train it very directly into the starter home as a housing typology that largely is going extinct at the moment, and we're looking to reinvigorate it out of necessity, that this is a type of house that needs to exist. And I think the thinking on it can change from just it being a small house or an affordable house, but one that can really grow with you. And so that's what we're going to focus on today, the starter home, and our approach or our thoughts on how the starter home should grow with the inhabitant, with the person who buys it. So if you haven't already visited, head to thestarterhome.com, which is where we are in real time really developing these ideas that a lot of times you'll work on a new product, you'll kind of set it up in the lab, and then you'll launch and say, hey, we're out and we're up and it's fully baked. Our general perspective is that we want to highlight the process as we go and bring people into the fold and let them know how we're thinking about this and how we're developing our starter home product. And these webinars and this site are part of that. So here we are at thestarterhome.com. You see some of the key philosophies here, that this is a home designed to get you in the door of home ownership. It's a home designed to grow along with you, which is what we'll go over today. And it's a home designed to be the right size for you today. And I think most importantly for you tomorrow. So it's really kind of six big notions here that each of these have their own larger blog with real depth that you can go into of how do we define a starter home. One of the things is that it should be appropriately sized. We're big believers that in the average square foot per person that was prevalent in the 1960s at that time in new construction in newly constructed American homes. It's around 350 square feet per person for a newly constructed house. So family of four, it's around a 1,400 square foot house. Today, that number is almost over 1,000 square feet. So on average, that means in the new construction house, if it's designed for a family of four, it's 4,000 square feet. And the reason for that are there's many of them, but the key one is that spec home developers are incentivized to build as much square footage at the lowest possible cost and then sell it at the highest possible cost, because they're taking on all the risk, and then they are pushing that premium on the consumer, and that is what the consumer is buying. For us, operating as a fee developer and working in tandem with our clients, we have a completely different model, and it allows us to pursue homes that are what we would describe as more appropriately sized. They should also be appropriately priced, and the way that we think about this is not absolute, that not across all markets is it a $300,000 house, or all markets is a $400,000 house. Instead, we look at dual income households and average dual income household income in a market, and then say the house in that region should be no more than 4 times that amount. That would be kind of prudent personal finance guidance, and we think sets a good mark for us to hit market by market, which means, of course, if we're in Kansas, it's going to be different from Mississippi. If we're in Maine, it's going to be different from California. But we we're looking at how the home type can be flexible to hit that market by market, and be appropriately priced. And then that it should be where you want to live, which I think is one of the things that are one of the criteria that have largely gone out the window, as the operation of getting a house has been largely outsourced to large spec home developers and conglomerates that are looking to kind of find the biggest, cheapest piece of land and subdivide it as much as possible, which means that you're going to live in, if you buy a house that way, where they want you to live, where they have found it to be easiest to develop, where there's been the least amount of red tape, where groundwork has been least expensive, where the location meets their model and not necessarily your lifestyle. When you kind of take on the Huts directed sort of protocol of sourcing a raw piece of land and then developing it into your own home, that gives you a lot more flexibility on being where you want to live. And then really the last idea, and really what we're going to focus on here, is that what we're developing here on the starter home is not just a home plan, a locked in place home plan, but it's really a home plan. Like, what is your housing plan going to be, not just as a starter home, but for the rest of your life? And traditionally, the starter home has been thought of as a place that you sort of limp into in your early career, early life. Maybe it's just you and your partner as a couple buying a home for the first time, maybe no kids yet. And it's a place that was at a scale and designed to really be a place that you would be temporarily, that you would live there for 5 to 7 years or so before gaining some equity, and then selling the property, and then trading up to the next house. And then if you had maybe an expanded family, trading up to the next one, and kind of going down that path until you sort of achieve forever home. Some real issues with that, and this kind of step up model that was the standard for years and years, is that each one of those transactions not only come with the trauma of moving and shifting and replacement, but also come with the going in and going out costs. You have property taxes on both sides. You have realtors' fees on both sides. You have moving costs on both sides. You start adding that up across 3 or 4 moves, you can get into hundreds of thousands of dollars that have gone away, along with like continually chopping down the roots of where you chose to live. So a big part of our philosophy here on the starter home is, how can the starter home be a place that you get into in the beginning, but then it can grow with you over time through all of these life cycle stages. So let's talk through first some of the design formats and design criteria that we care about, and then some of the economics that we are thinking through when we imagine this model. Why is this a better approach? So what we're designing for is a house that has 4 or 5 stages, all of which are kind of baked into the DNA of the product up front. That the 15 to 20 year plan for this house is already in place, even if you don't execute on all of it up front. So phase 1 would really be sourcing your piece of land and building the first part of the house, which would be around a 700 or 600 plus square foot footprint with a second floor and an unfinished basement. So imagine a house that's about 20 by 30, sort of Cape style in its format, and the utilization when it's really just you as a couple. 2 folks, you need sort of 1 bedroom, you need maybe a half guest bedroom, you need a work from home space, and then you have a number of unfinished spaces. So living, kitchen, dining, bedroom downstairs, guest bedroom, office space upstairs, and then half of the attic is left raw but set up for future development with plumbing stubbed out, with electrical in place, but still treated as unfinished so that you're not paying the premium on finishing out that space. And then a full basement that is also left unfinished for the time being. And what we imagine here is this is a space that you would go through what is kind of typical for our HUTS clients today, where they're buying their land cash. They are doing, and then all the improvements and the construction is done with a construction loan that flips into a mortgage, into a 30-year fixed mortgage. And because you're developing the property yourself, you're not getting the developer's premium on top of it, let alone this a house type that, like I mentioned earlier in the call or early in the webinar, that it's just not a format that developers are incentivized to build because it's not there's not enough delta there between the cost of each square foot that they're building and the amount of square footage that they're able to sell. There's really no incentive to build a smaller house. But for you, if you're looking for a starter home, there is. And so taking this on yourself is the way to get this format of house and remove the premium that would typically come from the developer. So here we're building around a 20 by 30 dimensioned footprint with the ground floor fully finished, the basement unfinished, and half of the loft or second floor attic space finished to get around an 750 square foot starter home in its first version with around 860 square feet of unfinished space. Okay, phase two hits. And now let's say you've had a child and your family is starting to grow. And let's say it's around 3-4 years after you have initially built the starter home. The next phase is to do a attic renovation on the second half of the second floor. So that's going to include some insulation, some drywall, but some tiling for the bathroom that's up there. But all of those spaces would have already been set up with plumbing, electrical, other systems in place to really make it a kind of cosmetic renovation and in no way a structural and infrastructural renovation. So the hope here is that you're sort of saving towards that. And this is something that could be easily executed in cash, that this 150 square foot additional space where you're adding another bedroom and another bathroom gets added onto cash. In phase three, now we're expanding into the basement. Similarly, we would have plumbing and electrical and insulation already kind of stubbed out, but none of the finishes and fixtures that finish out the space. So the concept here is we're about 7 years after you initially purchased this place. You would have been storing equity both through the really excellent cash renovation you did in adding additional square footage, along with the appreciation that comes with time. And so that's a good moment to do this big basement renovation where you're adding an additional 600 square feet or so through a home equity line of credit that you're borrowing against the stored equity in the property, and that you have kind of plenty stored there because of the timing, and that you have forced equity into the project through the renovation. So our concept here is that now you have really 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. You've got 2 bedrooms up in the top floor. You have the initial 1 bedroom downstairs. You have the initial full bath you had from phase 1. You have the new full bath in the upstairs space from phase 2. And down in the basement, you're adding in the types of things that larger families need: a new dedicated work from home space, a new kind of den space, and a playroom. And you're really expanding the function of the home. So then the last on the construction side is thinking about, all right, now it's 15 years later, your family's sort of grown. And one of the things that we face all the time with huts is multi-generational living. And how do we create either an ADU or an in-law suite or another place for us to be? And to kind of spread the roots or spread the wingspan of the house. So here we would have designed for where that addition is going to go, that all of the waistline runs, all of the plumbing setup, all of the electrical is designed specifically to grow in one direction on the lot. Like I was saying, one of the things that always pops up with our projects at Huts is the need to add multi-generational living, to think about where in-laws and guests might stay. And we would design for this addition right up front in the project. And in some cases, may even be able to permit for it so that you've already cleared the red tape, even if it comes online 10, 15 years down the line, and you're just extending that permit for the time that you live in the property. So we'd have a natural space to have a connector and add on this in-law suite, which we see as sort of around a 500 square foot bedroom, full bath, closet, small living space, small kitchenette, kind of a self-enclosed unit. And at this point, you're almost 15 years into the property. You would have been paying down the mortgage. You would have been seeing serious appreciation along the way. In theory, at this point, you would have also paid off the HELOC that you took for the basement renovation in phase 3. And there's an opportunity, depending on either interest rates at that moment, to do a cash out refinance to finance the addition, or take out a fresh HELOC to finance this addition. And you end up with this kind of multi-generational family compound that serves contemporary living needs, that you have a few generations here, you've kind of expanded naturally, and you've largely financed it through the accumulated appreciation of the initial property. Along the way, you also have not forfeited all the going in and going out fees that come with moving. You've stayed in place, you've grown roots in that area, and you've developed the initial property that you started with into a place that meets the functions of your life as you go. There's a phase that we haven't laid out here, but I think a really interesting one, which is even further down the line, that once you say downsize, now we're in kind of approaching our retirement years. And instead of selling the family home or selling out the property, we're instead utilizing the in-law suite and then renting the main house to somebody. So generating passive income in retirement through the rental of the main house, creating a space that is either a permanent home when you're retired or kind of in downsizing mode on the previous in-law suite, or it's a place that you stay seasonally if you're going to snowbird or whatever your retirement plan looks like. But to create that optionality where you really have a two-family home in a single-family setting, and more municipalities across the country, because of housing demand and housing shortages, are allowing for ADUs or second units or re-entitlement as multi-unit lots all over the place. And that trend is going to continue. So that's the idea on the sequencing, going from the same shell of the house, but just growing into it over time. And the way that you grow into it is already predetermined. Some of you out there may have gone through a home renovation or the goal of kind of expanding on the house. And typically, houses are designed to be done, that when it is delivered, it's completed. Here, and that makes renovations very hard to think through. How do you do something that you're not going to have to backtrack on later? How do you do something where the economics make sense and the financing approach makes sense? Here, we've kind of baked the logic of how are you going to grow into the project or grow into the home, and how are you going to finance each of those stages directly into the house product. So like I described, it's both a home plan that we're starting with, but it's also a plan that how are you going to finance it? How are you going to grow? How do we not make a mess of our renovations and additions over time, but instead sort of naturally follow along on each of the next steps? You can see that these plans are quite diagrammatic as we show them, but I just want to give you guys a little bit of a look on how this is developing. So, just like a couple of snapshots from some of the various formats we're exploring, getting closer and closer on being able to lock in on what we think is the most appropriate format. But you can see here that we're sort of designing for the end stage and then figuring out what would be built or what would the format be at each phase. So here, from our design team, one idea of a completed house with its rear or side yard addition and just the highlighted pieces falling into phase one. And then phase two for upstairs, phase three into an expanded basement and suite below, and then the addition in the future. Other takes and iterations on thinking about, depending on the lot type, whether the lot is long and skinny or it's a square lot, where would we actually add on that addition to make sure that our unit type is applicable for all of the places it might be built, whether it's in sort of like more village type infill lots, whether it's completely rural lots, whether it's 50 by 100 lots, whether it's 3-acre lots. There's going to be different considerations on how does that expansion happen, and making sure that our product and this home plan and the planning of the home is universally applicable. Again, looking at other formats here and different means of circulation. Part of the goal and part of the challenge is that we are looking to be quite space efficient, that what makes this work is that you can get into the house inexpensively. That one of the problems with so many starter homes today, or at least those homes that are available at the lower end of the market in a lot of places, is that, things have come out recently saying that there's 200 towns across America where the lower 25% of houses available in that market are $1 million plus. And so that's just not going to work. And we need to then get a lot more efficient with the space planning so that our cost per square foot, both the cost per square foot and the total square footage that we're building allows for some accessibility. So we're really getting into like kind of Swiss Army knife sort of manipulations and sizing here, where the resulting house ends up being around 2,200 square feet for six or some odd people, which makes a world of sense within our 350, 375 square feet per person rule. Remember, back from the 1960s, that was kind of the average sizing. But that the starting point is something that's more like 750 square feet and then growing from there. So just a little bit of look here on the product development process and how we're working through these stages and on the design side. And then the last thing, looking at the economics, because I think that this is one of the real differentiators. There are a lot of places you can go to explore smaller home plans. There's very few places you can go where there's a built-in evolution to the house, that each of the steps along the way based on the major milestones of life are sort of already designed for before you even get there. But even less than that are opportunities to understand the economics of it. So I would encourage everyone to head to thestarterhome.com, check out this blog of It's Not Just a Home Plan, It's a Home Plan. But let me give you a couple key numbers here, that looking at phase one, where we're building that kind of home built for two and targeting around a $300 a square foot cost, or imagining building out the finished space for around $225,000. You'd have the land that you'd purchase for these purposes, let's call it $75,000 plus $40,000 of improvements, well, septic, power, driveway, other conditions to make the land build ready. You have a total initial investment of around 340 grand with an expected after construction value of around 1.25 of that. So around $400 a square foot. So right off the bat, getting to around $75,000 in equity. And this was what normally would be the equity or the profit that a developer would get from doing this project. But you are going to act as a developer. You're kind of going from raw land to a constructed place. So you get to enjoy the storage of that equity. On phase two, again, time has passed. We're getting some appreciation here. We're kind of calling it out at 7% per year, which I think is a pretty reasonable and conservative expectation. And so our cost per square foot is going up around 7% per year. And you have also now cash financed this addition to the attic. So you have more square footage that's also appreciating in time. And now you have a home that is larger, pushing up around 925 square feet, valued around $450,000, with an additional $60,000 in equity that have gone into it, none of which you have tapped at this point because you've cash financed phase two. Moving into phase three, where we're starting to utilize the house as an asset to collateralize, something to use to be able to finance the next pieces. And so again, we're still getting that 7% appreciation as we go. We're 7 years down the line. It feels hard to understand, but this is how kind of accrued appreciation would work, that we get around $640 a square foot value at that time, 7 years down the road. You now are finishing the basement as completed conditioned space. So you have a 1,675 square foot house times $640 a square foot. It's around $1 million house at this point. And for that renovation piece downstairs, you put around $225,000 into it. So at this point, you've got $617,000 into the house. It's worth approaching 1.1. You've got around $450,000 in equity, and you've sort of tapped that through the HELOC to build out this house. So the same kind of logic follows. Time is going, appreciation is helping to help you store some equity, and we're making smart moves at the right time to be able to utilize the house to expand. And again, looking way down the line in year 15, continue to get the 7% appreciation over 15 years at this point. We're at a place that's around $1,100 a square foot. We have added this addition that we've built for a fraction of that, because the cost of construction will be less than the cost of resale, and got around 2,200, 2,300 square feet times 1,100 square feet. House is is tracking to be worth around $2.5 million at that point. And through our HELOC and other kind of loans, we would have had around $797,000 into the house, yielding around $1.7 million of accumulated equity. So that would be very hard to achieve if you're trading up in a series of houses, where in each one you're kind of starting over on that equity and appreciation scale. And on each one, you also have the accumulated costs that come from going in or leaving the house and going into the next. And like I mentioned, and feel free to read through this in more detail, but part of the premise is as well that there's a broader strategy even before this becomes your forever home, but really becomes your multifamily passive income generator in retirement, that you can downsize to the addition. You could rent both of the units separately. You could do any number. You could kind of go through a heavy cash out refi and continue to rent it and utilize the cash as part of your retirement. You just have a lot of options at that point because you have a very equity rich property with a lot of optionality attached to it. So again, it starts as a starter home, but then has this evolution and strategy for how it grows into an asset that serves all of the stages of your life. So this is a home that is designed to grow with you, and we're very excited around what it can become. So let me stop there. If there are any questions out there, let me try to field them here. And yeah, so Evan writes, how's your team suggesting procuring materials within the different regions, climates, and areas of North America? Hudson Valley, New York is different from Nashville, Tennessee. Evan, one thing I would mention is that Huts already works across the country. We've got active projects across 15 states, all of which get localized by their local conditions. And that includes both prevailing construction methodologies, prevailing construction materials, and accessibility, and also all kinds of local regulations. California, you've got seismic issues, and that changes our foundation conditions. Projects in the mountains in Idaho or special wind zones, and you have kind of roof tie down conditions for extreme winds. There's all kinds of things that we're already doing to localize. So while a lot of our early projects were in the Catskills and Hudson Valley of New York, today our standards and the starter home, as you know, as a real productized version of that, will have the same localization efforts attached to it. See if there's any else. Great. So if there are no other questions, please do continue to follow along at thestarterhome.com. We are very excited with how our home product is developing and how it fits into the broader home design and development ecosystem of Huts and our methodology of going from raw land to completed homes. But I think this as a real product that fits what we see as a very urgent need is coming along quite well. So we will continue to release more information as we have it and are very excited to be able to bring this to market soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.